It's like I don't care about nothing, man. Yeah. Oh, good.
So this video is on slope and what the difference is between a slope when it's parallel versus perpendicular. So by the end of this video, you should be able to tell me what the difference is with the slope if it's parallel versus perpendicular. So I hope you enjoy. Okay, so the first problem or page, I should say, that we're doing in this video is page 25. Now, in this video, we're talking about slope. So for the first one, to describe the steepness of a line, we use slope. Now, slope is something that you did a lot in Algebra 1. You could have heard it called many different things. M represents the slope. It's also called the rate of change, gradient, rise over run, vertical change over horizontal change. What we're going to be putting in this blank is the actual formula to solve for slope, and that would be y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1, which makes sense because if it's rise over run, rise would be the y values, run would be the x values. So for the rest on this page, we're just trying to give you an example of what a positive slope, a negative slope, a slope of 0, and an undefined slope could look like. So a positive slope would be a slope that as it goes to the right, it's getting bigger. So it could look something like this. A negative slope is one that's going to be going downwards. So it could look like this. I had an old teacher, the way that she used to explain this, make it so you remember it, is if it's a negative slope, she used to say you always have the right to be negative. The reason she said that is because if you go ahead and put your right arm down and it fits on that line, then it's a negative slope. So the next one is a slope of 0. That's one where it's going to be going horizontally. So it's not going up or down, it's just going to the left or right. And an undefined slope is one that goes straight up and down, so vertically. So the way that I like to remember how you know which one is which, slope of 0 means that you're, as it says, the slope is 0. So the only way to have that is if 0's in the numerator. And one teacher that I used to have, the way she would explain this one, is that if 0's in the numerator, it's okay. Now, undefined slope, you cannot have a 0 in a denominator. So if you have undefined slope, 0 is in the denominator. And the way that she used to explain this one is if 0 is in the denominator, we say no. So that is a way to remember that. So on the next page, page 26, we go through the different types of forms that we can use to find slope and y-intercept. When it's this one, slope-intercept form, is probably the one that you're most accustomed to, the y equals mx plus b, where m is the slope and b is your y-intercept. So if I gave you example, if I did y equals 1/3 x plus 2, then my slope, so my slope would be 1/3, because whatever's in front of the x is the slope in this form, and my y-intercept would be 2. Whoops, not b, I would want to say 2. The one right next to it, point-slope form, we use this form when you have a point. So the x1, y1 is a point, and typically you already also have the slope. So we use this one when we have a point and a slope and we're trying to create an equation. So an example, if, let's say, I gave you a slope of, we'll say 1/3 again, and let's say I'm going to give you a point of 2, 1. If I wanted to put it into this form, I would do y minus y1. So this would be my y value, so it would be -1, equals, my m is 1/3, that's my slope, and in parentheses x minus 2. So if I were given this point and this slope, that's how I would set it up. The next one here is standard form. This is the one that you'll see a little, usually a little bit more in college, compared to the slope-intercept form, where m. Now I'm going to give you a formula on how to find the slope. Now, if it's in standard form, I can do the opposite of a over b to find the slope. So opposite of a means if a was positive, it turns negative. If it was negative, it would turn positive. And then it would be all over b. And whatever the sign is in front of b, it would keep that. And b would be, or your y-intercept would be c over b. So that is how I would find each of those. So let's say if I gave you this equation, 2x plus 4y equals 8, my slope would be equal to, so opposite of a, so -2, because it used to be positive, over b, which is 4. Now, since this can simplify down, we want to simplify it. So I'm going to divide the top and the bottom by 2, because it can simplify, and I'll get -1 over 2. Now, if you had to find your y-intercept, then I would have had 8 over 4, because c over b. And this can simplify down to 2. So one thing I want you to keep in mind is whenever you're doing slope, slope should always stay as a fraction. Don't turn it into a decimal. So I shouldn't turn this to -0.5. Keep it as -1 over 2. So now the most important thing of what we're getting from today is what's on these two bottom parts. So
Focus.
So first we're going to deal with parallel lines. So the goal for today is to know what you need to know about the slope when they're parallel. So what we're going to write in here. In a coordinate plane, two non-touching lines.
I'm not touching you. Are you touching me? Not touching.
Because parallel lines are not allowed to touch, are parallel if and only if they have the same slope. So for this one, the important thing to know is that the slope has to be the same. So if you forgot the symbol for this, so parallel can be two lines straight up and down, or they can be slanted like this. So I'm going to give you an example. If I were to say the slope of the first one was 1/2, if they are parallel, it would also be 1/2 because they are supposed to be the same. So in order for these to be parallel, they have to be the same. So the next thing that is just as important as the one before is knowing the difference in the slope if they are perpendicular. Now, if they are perpendicular, what we're going to say in a coordinate plane, two touching lines are perpendicular if and only if the slopes are opposite I'm going to change pen since this one doesn't want to work right. And reciprocal. What opposite and reciprocal means? Opposite means we change the signs. So if it was positive, it turns negative. If it was negative, it turns positive. And reciprocal means flip the fraction. So the product of their slope is going to be 1. So if you multiply them, it should be 1, or I should say negative 1. Now, if you don't remember the symbol, that is, it looks like an upside down T. So perpendicular lines have to touch and form a 90-degree angle. Now, if I give you an example, let's say if I said we want to find the line that would be perpendicular to this slope. The slope would have to be opposite, so since this was positive, the other one would have to be negative. And since I flipped the fraction, it would now be 2 over 1. So I would have negative 2 over 1 now if the original one was 1/2, if I wanted them to be perpendicular. So I'm going to do part A with you to end this video. So for part A, the first one is in y-intercept form. I know it looks somewhat different because it just says y equals 2x. It doesn't have a y-intercept. Well, since you see the y equals, that's where we're finding the y-intercept form, or slope-intercept form, I should say.
What an idiot.
And the slope is going to be whatever is next to the x. So in this one, our slope is equal to 2. Now this side, it's not in any of the forms we know. So my goal is to turn it into one of the forms that I do know. So it's very close to standard form. The only thing that's missing is that this needs to be on this side. So to do that, I'm going to subtract 3y from both sides. So now, since this can't go together, I'm just going to put them next to each other. So 6x minus 3y equals 5, because these canceled out. Now it's in standard form. To find the slope in standard form, I told you we do the opposite of a over b. So the opposite of a, this is going to be negative 6, because it was positive, over negative 3. So negative 6 divided by negative 3 equals a positive 2. So since they both have the same slope, I'm going to say that they are parallel. So that's the idea with these problems. You find the slope of each to see if they're parallel, perpendicular, or neither. So I hope you found those enjoyable. Now you should have also, at the end of this, been able to tell me what the slope is going to be if it's parallel versus perpendicular. So parallel has to be the same. Perpendicular, we do the opposite, and reciprocal, which means we change the sign and flip the fraction. So for homework, what I would like you to try to do is page 20 and the rest of page 27 as well. So have a good rest of the day.